Hello, everyone. It's Captain Gillen again. Now we're going to talk about the first skill in Master Resiliency Training, and that skill is goal setting. Like I said, there's 14 of these skills. We're going to take a couple of years to cover all of them, so don't be intimidated by the fact that there's so many. This isn't something that we're going to sit through for hours and hours and hours on end. It's manageable. We've got a lot of time to cover these, but for a virtual drill, we'll cover at least this first one, and depending on time and depending on how many months we go virtual after Christmas, we'll get through a couple of these. So anyway, I thought that goal setting was an appropriate skill to cover given the time of the year. This is for January drill, and a lot of the time people come up with new goals at the beginning of the year, especially given the year that we just went through or are about to finish, 2020. There were a lot of things that we probably thought we were going to do this year that just didn't happen, which is the case for most years, but I think 2020, it's even more so the case. Because this was just a year where a lot of things were different. I know that personally I've been working at home since March. that's 9 months this year that I did not go into the office, which has been fun. It's been really fun. Because I've gotten to spend more time with my wife and my daughter on my breaks, but it's just been different. This year's thrown a lot of curveballs for everybody. And I know people talk about that so much that it's kind of cliche to dwell on it, so we're going to move past it because it kind of makes me cringe a little bit. But goal setting. So the idea here is that we're taking deliberate action to accomplish something that we want to do. A lot of us have a lot of experience pursuing goals and setting up goals. I mean, we're all adults here. We've all set out to do things, and a lot of things we failed at, a lot of things we've succeeded at. It's not really something new. It's just a more deliberate, defined process for something that a lot of us are already doing. And the fact that we quantify it and we put it in a process makes it easier to actually do it deliberately instead of just kind of stumbling in through it. And that deliberate action, in my mind and in the Army's mind, makes these goals a little bit more attainable. When you have a process, you can follow that process, and you're not just kind of wandering through and hoping that you reach something. It's something that is tangible. There's progress that you can see getting towards it. But anyways, let's just get into it. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. All right. Yeah, so what I was trying to say is that this lesson's going to help you refine the goal setting process that you've already probably been taking yourself through when you try to reach a goal. So that refinement is what's going to make this a little bit more effective, I think, than what you and I probably do without this skill. Okay. All right, so again, here's the shield that we were talking about. We spoke about the shield at the end of the introduction of MRT. The top left corner there is the symbol for goal setting. It's a compass. And we'll talk a little bit more about why a compass is appropriate for the skill of goal setting as we progress through this video. So we talked about the 6 core competencies of resilience. The core competency that goal setting falls under is self-regulation. I think that's pretty easy to see. The reason it falls under self-regulation is you are taking things that you want to do in the short term and maybe denying yourself of that short-term gratification in the pursuit of something that you want that's more long-term. So you're regulating what you want in the short term to achieve things that are further off and that you think are probably more valuable than those short-term pleasures. Goal setting can be an effective means to grow and thrive, especially following adversity. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you do after following some kind of adversity, but it is a good thing to do. It's a good way to bounce back and maybe come back from something that was really difficult to go through. If you go through something difficult, then if you find a way to get past that difficult thing by setting up new goals, it can be really motivating, and it can be a way of pulling yourself up out of that rut. Goal setting is an effective strategy to facilitate the achievement of dream goals as well as enhance performance. So we can use goal setting for things like retiring when you're 50, or that would be an example of a dream goal. Retiring when you're 50 with an income of, or a yearly budget of $60,000. Just trying to give you an example of one. That would be a dream goal. Enhanced performance, that would be something like getting to a 300 on the PT test or a 600 on the ACFT, now that we're going into that. So it can be used for multiple different things. Okay, so goal setting. Key word on this slide is deliberately. Goal setting is a process to deliberately energize, direct, and sustain behavior to ensure progress. So this isn't something that you just kind of wade into. It's not something that you just kind of do naturally or organically. I mean, there is an appeal to doing things organically and just kind of falling into them because they feel more natural. And a lot of the times those more natural things are just more enjoyable to do. But goal setting is used to achieve things that are difficult, and you don't generally do difficult things by just wandering in and doing things organically. These are things that you need to deliberately set out to do and plan to do. The old cliche, if it's worth doing, then it's worth making a plan for doing it. And if it was easy, everybody would do it. You know, there's dozens of little sayings like that kind of drive this point home. Now take a look at this sign here. If you were to drive up to this sign, would you really have any clear direction of what to do coming into this set of intersections? Well, no, not really. It's just kind of a jumbled up mess. Whoever designed these roads, if this sign is real, I'm not even sure this sign is real, but whoever designed these roads really didn't start out the process with a deliberate plan in mind. Those roads probably were just kind of patched together. So think about goal setting as starting out on a road trip. Goal setting requires a deliberate, well thought out plan, as well as a tracking system to ensure progress. So an example that we'll pretty consistently go back to here is GPS. When you start out a trip, you start with the end in mind. So you put in the address that you're going to, and then you tell the GPS where you currently are, and then it gives you a route, and then you follow that route. And we'll flesh that example out a little bit more as we go through this. The progression here that we want to think about in goal setting is first deliberate planning. When we sit down and deliberately plan out how we're going to achieve a goal, that produces motivation, and that motivation energizes us to take actions towards our goal. So goal setting works. It's effective in many areas, for many tasks and performances, and for many people, including both individuals and groups. So this is something that you'll be able to use for your own personal goals, and if you find yourself in a leadership position, you can also do this with your group to set up group goals. So what motivates you and what motivates others? Normally we'd break out here and have half of the group discuss what motivates you, and the other half discuss, as a leader, how do you motivate those that you lead? Obviously, we can't do something like that with a virtual environment, so let's adjust this a little bit. After this brief explanation, go ahead and pause the video and just think about this for a second. Maybe write a few of these down. What motivates you? What are some things that when you're trying to do something that really you'd rather not be doing, or that is not easy, what are some of the things that go through your head to keep you pushing through it so that you don't give up? And then as a leader, when you're leading people in ways, or leading people to do a task that maybe the group doesn't really want to do, or maybe just isn't that easy. Maybe they do want to do it, but it's not something that comes very easily. How do you as a leader motivate that group to keep going and to push through those feelings of wanting to give up? I mean, that can be in a military context for sure, but it could also be with your family. This doesn't have to be all Army stuff. Make this as personal as you need it to be. Just whatever comes to mind. There's not really a right answer here. Sometimes goals are given to us by others, which can make it especially hard to find the motivation to complete them. So motivation, and we'll get a little bit more into this too, it's a lot easier to maintain motivation if you're doing something that you want to do instead of doing something that you are told to do. I think we've all run into details at various times in our career in the military that we didn't really want to do, but we knew needed to be done, and we were told to do them. Those things are a little bit more difficult to find the motivation to continue doing than something that you enjoy and that you're doing because you want to do it. It can be challenging to generate your own motivation, but even harder to inspire motivation in others. So if you find that you are a person who really lacks motivation in doing things that aren't pleasant, well, think about that and then multiply it by a couple of degrees of magnitude, and it's that much harder to motivate other people to do those things that they don't want to do. So something to keep in mind when your leader is giving you something unpleasant to do. If it's hard for you to motivate yourself, just think about how hard it is for that leader to motivate you. Goal achievement, especially the achievement of long-term goals, relies on understanding your own and others' sources of motivation. So throughout this goal-setting process, you really need to think about what motivates you. Find a couple of things and values. Find a couple of values or behaviors that you can refer back to that are going to push you through whatever thing you're trying to do. Because again, we're doing things here that are not as pleasant in the short term, but ideally they're going to help you achieve something that is more desirable in the long term. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some sources of motivation, and we'll keep referring back to this throughout the process of goal setting. So there are a couple of different types of motivation, and I wanted to cover those here in depth with you. So first you have intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is something that you do purely for the pleasure of doing it. You don't gain anything by doing it. You aren't compensated in any way for doing it. It's something that you just really like to do. This particular category of motivation is probably going to be something that doesn't have a lot of examples for you. And again, these are very subjective. So what motivates me is not going to be the same thing that motivates you, and vice versa, more than likely. But for me, the only clear example that I could think of intrinsic motivation is playing video games. It's not something that I get to do very often anymore now that I have a child. But for me, I really like to play a game called Destiny 2. And I really, when I play that game, or when I play any game really, I am not advancing myself in any form or fashion. It doesn't have any kind of positive effect on my life other than it gives me a break. But it doesn't help me make money. It doesn't make me smarter. It doesn't help me get closer to my family. It's purely something that I do for my own pleasure. So that's my one thing that I can think of that's an intrinsic motivator for me. Try to think of a couple of examples, or maybe one example for yourself. Maybe it's video games for you too. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But maybe it's something else. Just make this more personal for you. Don't let me just do all the talking. Think about this. Flesh this out yourself. Now here's a spectrum for the other types of motivation. So you've got intrinsic motivation, which is kind of outside of the spectrum. It's its own thing. But then for other types of motivation, starting on the left there, you've got instrumental motivation, and then there's just a spectrum all the way to the right for internal motivation, which most closely resembles intrinsic motivation. And we're going to talk about a couple of different types that fall on this spectrum. So in instrumental motivation, think about things that are outside of you. So rewards or guilt, short-term motivators, these are less effective long-term. So for me, I'm the one talking, so I'm going to give you some examples. But like I said, flesh this out for yourself. I work in a call center on the civilian side. I work for a stockbroker, and I take calls and I help people place trades, and I teach them how the market works. It's pretty monotonous work, and I'm doing very similar things every day. One of the ways that they motivate us at my job to be efficient and to make sure that we are having good quality conversations with clients is quarterly compensation, bonuses. So I'm rated on a lot of different factors, but the two factors that determine my quarterly compensation and how big or small that is are calls per hour and customer satisfaction survey scores. This is an easy, clear example of a reward or punishment. If I have a lot of calls per hour on average, and if I have a lot of clients who are giving me high ratings because of how I've treated them and my conversation with them, then I will get a higher bonus. Right now, if I got the top tier, I could get $3,000 a quarter. If I got basically what they call target, then I could get $1,500 a quarter. That is a way that my employer motivates me to do good work. Now, it's when I took this particular position back in September, that was a pretty big jump. Target back then was $750 a quarter, and the top tier bonus in my previous role was $1,500 a quarter. So they doubled it. They doubled my quarterly compensation potential. That was a big motivator for me at first to do well, but as the quarter has gone on, and as the end of the year has just gotten busier and busier, which is normal for this industry, that particular type of motivation has become less effective for me. So it was effective in the short term, but it's not something that sustains motivation for me, and I don't think it does for my colleagues as well. I mean, it's still a slight sense of motivate, or a slight source of motivation for me, because hey, money is money. I like money, but I'm not as excited about it as I was when I first started in this role. The reason instrumental motivators are less effective than internal motivators is they infringe upon your sense of autonomy. Because really, something that we as humans like is a sense of being able to control and do what you want to do. And these instrumental motivators, when you boil it down, they're basically just ways of upper management or middle management trying to control you. I mean, that's not good, that's not bad. My employer needs me to have good numbers because their bottom line is money too. But because it's an infringement upon my autonomy, it's not as effective. So we've got rewards or punishment on the far left side in the instrumental category. And then on the far right side in internal, we've got self-identity. So internal motivators, they are very different than instrumental motivators. They are internal, obviously. They focus on valuing behavior or self-identity. They're long-term motivators, and they're much more effective. So rather than quarterly compensation, a source of internal motivation would be something like, something like a Bible verse for me. As a Christian, I refer back to the Bible pretty often. Ecclesiastes 9:10 says that whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. So that I part of my identity is a Christian, and as a Christian, I try to follow the Bible as much as I can. So because I have that self-identity of a Christian, I can motivate myself to do good work by looking back and referring to those Bible verses. Another example, just to kind of make it more personal for other people, I guess, is some people, they see themselves as hard workers, or they see themselves as reliable people. That is an identity that they have in their mind for themselves. So the fact that somebody sees themselves as a hard worker at my job, in the call center, for example, is going to be something that helps them continue to jump back into the calls after they get yelled at for 20 minutes by someone who can't reset their password on the website, just as an example. If someone who's got that self-identity of a hard worker, someone who's a reliable employee, they're going to be more internally motivated to just jump right back in than somebody who doesn't have that picture of themselves. And then a couple of other types of motivation that kind of fall in the middle there. And it's not going to show up on the slide, but if you look just to the right of rewards or punishment, so still kind of on the instrumental side of the spectrum, you could insert shame or guilt. So still sort of an instrumental motivator, but it gets a little bit closer to the internal side of the spectrum. Basically, just to kind of explain that, shame or guilt, you're not really thinking about rewards or punishment. You're just thinking about avoiding those feelings of shame and guilt. So again, going back to the call center example, for me, if my numbers aren't good, then my team looks bad at work, and my numbers affect my manager's quarterly compensation. So if I do bad in a quarter, that's going to potentially drop her down a tier so that she gets paid less in a quarter. That makes me feel bad. That's a source of shame for me. So it's a way to motivate me to do well in my work. And then if you look just to the left of self-identity, you could insert valuing the behavior. So not so much, not as internal as how you identify as yourself, but more just thinking that a particular behavior is something that's valuable. So maybe not necessarily thinking, hey, I am a hard worker. That would be a self-identity, but maybe thinking instead doing work or doing hard work is a good thing. So you're valuing the behavior of hard work, even though you don't really identify yourself as a hard worker. So doing good work is something that's commendable. So going back to the call center example, I have this internal motivation to take a lot of calls and to be nice to clients and to work well with them and to get their things done, because I think that's a good thing to do. Not necessarily because it's some sort of identity for me, but I do think that particular action is a good thing. So bottom line up front here for this slide, motivation's a spectrum. Don't think about these ends of the spectrum as good and bad. They have their place. Just think of them more as short-term and long-term. Instrumental, those motivators can be used to get done what you need to get done, but they're more for short-term goals, and internal would be more for long-term. Internal is definitely more sustainable. All right, so benefits of internal motivation. They decrease anxiety, they enhance concentration, increase positive emotion, feeling of being in flow, increase effort and persistence, provide satisfaction, and fulfills the need for autonomy. We covered that last point there. And the last slide. So people who activate internal motivation for their behaviors have greater well-being and exhibit resilience. So really, internal motivation is going to be the end of the spectrum that helps you practice resilience more effectively because it's long-term. And resilience is kind of a long-term thing. These people are meeting their desire for autonomy. For example, they feel they are in charge of their own behavior as opposed to being controlled by others or circumstances. And this can be applied to performing required tasks, for example, cleaning the motor pool, doing PT, by finding ways to connect the task to personal values and identity. So if you want to be internally motivated, try to find a way that any given task ties into either your self-identity or at the very least the values that you hold as a person, rather than focusing on the consequences for doing or not doing said task. All right, so your bucket list. We're going to go back to that participant guide that I showed you all in the last video. Let's see. This bucket list slide is covered on page 19. What I want you all to do is take a moment to pause this video, go to page 19. If you can print this out, good, go ahead and print it out. If not, just grab a piece of paper and write these down here. But keep this list because it's going to be important later on in the lesson. I want you all to just think about a couple of things that are on your bucket list. Just things that you want to do in life. Let this be a fun thing for you. It could be a lot of things. It could be, hey, I want to travel to all 7 continents, or it could be, I want to do this really physically challenging thing, or I want to complete this difficult degree. Seriously, anything that you want, anywhere that you want to go, anyone that you want to meet, whatever it is, put it on this bucket list. We're going to dream about it for a little bit. Hopefully we can make this fun. Well, it's going to be fun if you give it a chance. Circle any of the goals on the list that would warrant deliberately creating a plan to attain it. So you might have something on here that's pretty easily and quickly attainable, like something on my bucket list. I don't know, I want to go try this particular food. Well, that doesn't require a well thought out 7-step goal setting process. So that doesn't mean it's less valuable as something on your bucket list. It just means that we're probably not going to use it for this example. So go ahead and just throw all those things on that page and circle the ones that you think would be good to set up a 7-step process to try and attain. And then we'll come back to this later. All right, so benefits of goal setting. We talked about how goal setting is a lot like putting in your destination in a GPS and then following that GPS to get to your destination. So you start out with where to. You start out the goal setting process by thinking, what is my goal? Where do I want to be? Much like when you type in, or when you open up your navigation app, you type in the address of the place where you want to go, or at least something close to that if you don't know the address. So the goal setting process starts out by you deciding where you want to be. And then you just keep going. When you're in that navigation app, you're going to first start out with where you want to go, and then you start out with where you are right now. We'll break this down a little bit more, but as you follow this GPS, it tells you what to do next, turn in 2.5 miles. Much like having goals, they tell you how to behave. So a goal is going to direct your behavior. It's going to direct you to pursue maybe things that are less desirable in the moment in the interest of things that are more desirable in the future. Goals also help you to sustain that behavior. So they help you to keep pushing even when it's not pleasant. Because you're thinking, okay, this isn't really something that I like doing at the moment, but doing this unpleasant thing right now will help me get to a pleasant state in the future. And then also, when you miss a turn on a GPS, it recalculates for you and shows you an updated route. So something to think about with these goals, we're going to come up with a lot of grandiose plans, and it's going to be a really fun thing to do. But know that you're going to mess up. Know that it's not going to go exactly how you envisioned it, and that's okay. Having this deliberately thought out plan is going to make it easier to readjust when things don't happen to go your way. And we'll cover how that works too. All right, so here are the 7 steps. 7-step process. This is also found in your participant guides, which is that PDF that you've got attached in the video. This is a very deliberate process, and we're gonna flesh out what each of these steps are. But here's just a quick overview of what we're about to get into. So step 1, define your goal. Where are you going? Step 2, know where you are right now. If we're following the GPS example, starting point. Step 3, decide what you need to develop. Step 4, make plans for steady improvement. So step 3, let me backtrack for a second. Step 3 for the GPS example. That would look like you deciding on multiple routes. So if I'm going from here, like I did for this MRT course, if I'm driving from Rome, Texas, all the way up to Sparta, Wisconsin, there are multiple routes that I can take to get there. And I needed, when I made that drive, I needed to decide, okay, do I want to go on turnpikes? Do I want to avoid this road closure? Do I want to avoid this traffic at rush hour? Do I want to avoid this construction? There were a couple of things that I needed to look at, a couple of obstacles along the way. I had to decide which route I wanted to take. Same thing in setting up goals. There are things that are going to come up, and probably things that you can anticipate before you even start the process of attaining this goal. You need to decide what kind of obstacles are going to be in the way and how to avoid them or how to get past them. Step 4, make a plan for steady improvement. So these are action steps, things that you're actually going to do to achieve your plan. And then step 5, pursue regular action. These are things that you're going to regularly do, things that you're going to revisit, because you do need to revisit and kind of see where you are throughout this process. Step 6, commit yourself completely. So find ways to motivate yourself when things get tough, when you really want to give up, because you are going to want to give up. It's pretty inevitable. And then step 7, continually monitor your progress. So again, you need to revisit and see where you are, because if you're not revisiting and looking at where you are and what you've done, you might find yourself really off track. And there also might be some things that you need to change in your process, and you won't actually know all of the things that don't work in your plan when you start out making your plan. There are things that are going to not go your way or aren't going to work exactly the way you thought they would. So having done things to get towards your goal, but not necessarily achieving your goal yet, you'll be able to look back and say, okay, this stuff works, this stuff didn't. And then in step 7, you can readjust and maybe change some of the details of your plan. Okay, so there are basically key words for each of these steps to help you remember what each step is. So let's go back here. Step 1, we've got define your goal. The key word for that is end state, which is pretty easy. Your goal is the end state. Step 2, know where you are right now. Energize. So in the process, this is the moment where you kind of motivate yourself and you look at all of these things that could happen when you achieve your goal. And it's a sort of like pumping yourself up. You energize yourself to actually go out and take action. Step 3, decide what you need to develop. Keyword there is priorities. You're going to come up with a couple of priority things that you need to work on so that you can sidestep or step over any obstacles that come up. Step 4, make a steady plan for improvement. Keyword there is SMART steps. That's specific, measurable, action-focused, realistic, and time-bound. And we'll bring that up on the slide here. You don't have to remember that right now. But these are tangible things that you can do. They're basically smaller goals to help you get to your bigger goal. Steps 1 through 4 are part of the planning process. So you're not actually doing things yet in steps 1 through 4. You're just kind of planning. Then when you get over to step 5, that's where the action part comes. This is the act phase of the goal setting model. So step 5, pursue regular action. Keyword there is WIN, and that's an acronym. Army loves acronyms. The acronym stands for What's Important Now. So what can you take care of very quickly that will get you closer to achieving your goal? Step 6, commit yourself completely. Maintain motivation. So you're committing by finding ways to continue to motivate yourself throughout the process, because you're going to need it. This is a 7-step model that's supposed to be something that takes a while. And anything that takes a while, motivation can wax and wane. And step 7, continually monitor your progress. Keyword there is IPR, which stands for in-process review. So this is where you go back and you look and you say, how has my plan played out so far? Is there anything that I need to change? Is there anything that I need to do more of? All right, so here we would break out. There's not really going to be a chance to break out, so we're just going to stay together, and you're going to do this on your own. I would challenge you, though, once we finish up this process, to share this with at least one person. Maybe your spouse, maybe someone else in your unit. I don't know, but I found personally that if I share stuff like this with somebody, it kind of motivates me to keep it going, because then I don't want to be made a liar. That's kind of the shame and guilt motivation there, but it kind of works. But anyways, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Goals enhance performance. So goal setting can produce motivation, direct attention, increase effort and persistence, and promote new strategies. So goal setting is a way of making you want to do things, and it's a way of deliberately doing it. And the fact that you're sitting down and you're thinking critically about attaining a goal may help you come up with new ways of doing things that you wouldn't have thought to do, that you wouldn't have thought to try without sitting down with this deliberate process. Motivation matters. You're more likely to achieve goals when the motivation comes from within you and is tied to your personal values. So remember, this is something that's kind of sustained and long-term, and the sustained and long-term spectrum of motivation is the internal motivation. So we're going to want to find things that will internally motivate us throughout this process. And once again, self-regulation is the primary target of goal setting. You are taking your short-term desires and you're basically yielding those up to achieve something more long-term. Okay, so we're going to stop this video here, because starting at this point, we're kind of getting into a practical exercise, and we're going to use the PDF that I've shared with you all pretty thoroughly. So go ahead, if you don't have that open yet, open up that PDF. The link is in the description of this video to get to that PDF. We'll break it down step by step here, but we're going to go ahead and break up the video at this point. So consider what we just did sort of the classroom portion, and we're about to get into the hands-on portion in the next video.